370 Ukrainian drones just paralyzed Moscow curtain, and the city was engulfed in flames like no one expected.
(8:46 a.m.) October 6th, 2025. A low, impossible hum rose over the horizon, not like thunder, but like a tide of small engines moving with intent. From 6 hidden fields, the swarm unfolded, a layered river of carbon and code, sliding along riverbeds, under power lines, between tree lines. They arrived not as an army, but as weather. And then the skyline betrayed them. Explosions punctured glass ribs along the financial district, thin columns of flame-licking mirrored towers. Transformer vaults breathed smoke. Metro stations went dark. Trains stalled in tunnels as orange lights stitched the horizon. Office floors emptied into streets filled with ash and alarm. Cameras caught rooftop sparks, then a widening blackout sweeping neighborhoods like a hand drawing a curtain. If you had watched that morning unfold, would you have seen a breach or the start of a new doctrine of war? Tell me which one you believe. 3:09 a.m. October 4th, 2025. A time meant for sleep. Yet the air carried calculation. Over western Ukraine, the night split open. Not with thunder, but with engines, cold and disciplined. 31 cruise missiles and 21 one-way drones crossed the border in staggered waves, traveling at 540 knots and skimming no higher than 120 meters above ground. Their route-threaded power lines, riverbeds, and abandoned grain silos precision-built to hide inside silence. Air raid sirens triggered in 87 seconds, echoing across 3 provinces. Cell towers spiked with over 128,000 emergency pings before dawn. In bunkers, parents clutched children. In hospitals, staff struggled to move incubators before the lights flickered. Inside Kiev's underground command deck, screens displayed a flood of warnings. Coordinates, altitudes, threat vectors. Defense crews launched interceptor patterns, NASAMS, IRIS-T. Jeopard coverage overlapping in a 40-kilometer defensive ring. Algorithms filtered trajectories faster than human thought. 73% intercepted. A number that felt like victory on paper, but paper doesn't feel heat. 9 killed, 29 wounded. 2,453 residents displaced in under 6 minutes and 42 seconds. 1 pediatric wing ruptured by shockwave. 43 neonatal beds evacuated by hand. A fuel depot at Brody ruptured, burning 184,000 liters in a rolling column that stained the horizon like grief turned physical. Power grids cycled, collapsed, rebooted, failed again. 12 substations staggering offline in sequence. Rail sensors stalled across a 60-kilometer stretch, halting 3 commuter lines. Yet inside the bunker, there was no shouting, no fists on steel, just controlled breathing, steady taps of a pencil, and the quiet rhythm of minds sharpening into strategy. Someone marked a map, not a strike route, a silence corridor. They measured not anger, but angles, not emotion, but airspace. Ukraine was learning that victory in a modern war isn't only force, it's geometry, signal, rhythm. A voice spoke barely above a whisper. If they trust distance and height, what happens when we fight from below? No applause, no slogans, just nods. Steady, inevitable. Outside, night crews battled flame and shock. Inside, a mission board updated. PHASE 1. Absorb the blow. Phase 2. Speak without sound. The sun had not yet risen, but history already had. Speak without sound. Inside the mission board in the loft. 8:46 a.m. October 6th, 2025. No roar, no contrails, just motion quiet, purposeful, and low enough to blend with the hum of wind through autumn branches. Across 6 dispersed launch fields disguised as farms, scrap yards, and storage lots, technicians pulled tarps and checked final telemetry. There were no metals here, no brass, only hands steady with intent as 390-plus airframes stirred awake, each no heavier than 25 kilograms. each worth less than $2,000. Each born not in factories but in workshops where imagination stood in for budget. They didn't ascend like aircraft. They flattened, hugging earth, following irrigation trenches, river bends, rail lines, a formation shaped not by parade geometry but by terrain logic. A faint layer rising near 160 meters, a midband weaving between rooftops and treetops, a strike layer moving at 8 to 20 meters, almost brushing telephone cables. 47 minutes later, Moscow's outer sensors saw nothing unusual until intersections flickered, then stayed dark. A substation tripped, then another, then 4, and then the skyline rippled. 81 controlled impacts in just over 11 minutes. Not firestorms, precision disruptions, rooftop relay cabinets blown open, fiber splice junctions scorched, telecom masts coughing smoke into morning air. Metro trains braked mid-tunnel, freezing more than 1,800 passengers in stillness. Emergency call volume surged past 1,600 reports in minutes. Cameras showed smoke curling like thin brushstrokes over glass towers, while traffic lights blinked helpless red. In the Russian command grid, intercept orders came late. 160-plus missiles launched into open sky, a show of strength aimed at altitude, while the threat crawled beneath it like logic slipping under a locked door. No sweeping explosion, no grand spectacle, just precision, carving silence into infrastructure, proving that a sky watched closely can still be breached if the attack never leaves the ground. 10:21 a.m. Kiev, beneath concrete and earth. Above, trams rattled across steel tracks. Markets opened. Life moved. Below, deeper than subway lines and older than peace, a room glowed with screens that did not blink. Not generals, not admirals. Just 43 operators, 18 software engineers, 9 RF specialists, and a cluster of analysts tracing signal drift across 600 kilometers of airspace. Average age, barely past military draft. Their battlefield, screens tiled in telemetry, flight logic, thermal mapping, and failover pathways. For months, they had simulated this hour. 430-plus hours of swarm modeling, signal tests across 17 interference zones. Telemetry scraped from 9 million flight data points stitched from rural sensors, volunteer weather stations, and repurposed civilian antennas hidden in barns, silos, and apartment rooftops. Not rage repetition, not vengeance precision. Every unit in the sky carried triple frequency fallback bands, 5 terrain-guided route branches, and the ability to dissolve formation and reform in under 5 seconds. Each drone small enough to dismiss, cheap enough to replace, smart enough to adjust before humans finished reacting. On a side monitor, failure counts scrolled in calm digits. 52 downed, 72 disrupted by border jamming arcs, but 200 plus still gliding forward, linking and relinking like thought moving through circuits. A sudden spike Russian counter-jamming surge. Hands moved without hesitation. Frequencies shifted. Routing curved around a 14-kilometer electronic dead zone. Drones folding into new geometry, as if wind, not war, shaped them. No cheering. No fists raised. Just breath and numbers, and the hum of computation. Above this bunker, daylight touched Kiev like any other morning. Here, beneath it, a quiet reality solidified. Steel was no longer the threshold of power. Signal was. And in that silence, strategy sharpened, not loud, not seen, but undeniably advancing. 9:18 a.m. Moscow's defense grid braced for clarity and found chaos instead. Radar screens lit with phantom echoes, altitude spikes dissolving into ground clutter, returns jittering like static caught in a storm. Operators cycled filters again and again, pulse Doppler, terrain masking, low-band sweeps, each algorithm insisting on a truth no doctrine had prepared for. Nothing was where it should be. Then the city itself responded. A relay hub in Ramenki blinked out. Seconds later, a feeder line in Troparevo-Nikulino tripped, forcing power reroutes at 90-plus megawatt load. By minute 3, 4 high-voltage substations executed emergency isolation to stop a cascading grid collapse, leaving swaths of residential blocks dimming like lungs exhaling for too long. Intercept orders finally snapped through the network. 160-plus interceptors cut upward through haze, a display meant to project dominance. And yet, altitude was not the battlefield. The threat crawled beneath it, hugging train lines, rivers, tram cables, drifting through treetops and industrial corridors at 8 to 20 meters, too low to trigger confidence, too coordinated to be luck. Of the nearly 400 sorties launched, 219 were already inside the inner ring. Most carried only 2-kilogram payloads, but their effect was disproportionate. Roof-mounted switching closets scorched, telecom repeaters silenced, microwave backhaul links sputtering into failure. Traffic across 26 intersections stalled into blinking confusion. Corporate networks throttled. A data node near Dorogomolovo dropped into emergency cold shutdown to protect server stacks. On broadcast screens, bright intercept footage rolled in victory loops. But in secure channels, a classification notice spread, stark and clinical. Low-altitude breach at scale. Detection lag, 11 minutes, 42 seconds. Response saturation confirmed. Steel had not been settled, broken. It had been bypassed. A fortress built to look up had been struck by what learned to move just above the Earth, and in that narrow band, certainty unraveled. 9:52 a.m. October 7th, 2025. Moscow woke not to destruction, but to something colder, absence where certainty once lived. Elevators hung between floors, silent steel capsules holding more than 600 people in suspended time. Traffic lights blinked over empty intersections, red and amber stuttering like stunned heartbeat. Apartment towers hummed on backup power as generators fought fatigue, each minute a quiet reminder that stability now had limits. 83 precision impacts, not aimed at monuments, but at function. Rooftop relay cabinets scorched, fiber splice nodes severed. 2-kilowatt substations tripped to avoid cascading failure across the grid. And in 31 residential districts, darkness pooled in hallways as emergency lights flickered against concrete stairwells. Hospitals braced. One in Fili Davidkovo calculated only 9 hours of reliable generator fuel at intensive care load. Ambulances rerouted manually. Dispatch, cycling through analog fallbacks when digital channels lagged by 47 seconds, a small delay that felt enormous when time measured life. 15 confirmed dead, 51 injured, more than 40,000 residents displaced, guided to temporary shelters lit with portable lamps and uneasy whispers. Yet no building collapsed. No skyline crumbled. What failed was confidence quietly, relentlessly. Public broadcasts celebrated interceptors. State headlines praised resilience. But internal logs recorded network desynchronization, relay exhaustion, and 6 emergency grid partitions triggered to stop a wider blackout. This wasn't conquest. It was precision interruption, a reminder that power can bend without breaking, and fear can rise without a single tower falling. Above ground, smoke curled soft against glass facades. Below, a city listened to generators instead of certainty. And in that mechanical hum, Moscow learned something ancient, dressed in modern wires. Sometimes a capital doesn't fall, it pauses, and in that pause, the world changes. 6 p.m., October 8th, 2025. The smoke above Moscow thinned, streetlights flickered back one district at a time, and metro lines shuddered into motion like nerves returning after shock. On the surface, normalcy reappeared. But beneath it, systems ran heavy diagnostics looping, backups humming, invisible stress threaded through steel. Internal reports circulated in corridors no camera sees. Network disruption across 14% of communication nodes. Emergency fuel usage at 60+%. And infrastructure repair estimates climbing toward $2.5 billion. Nearly 50,000 residents displaced or sheltered not by collapse, but by caution. One line in a security briefing carried more weight than explosions ever could. $2,000 platforms degraded $500 billion defenses. Across the Atlantic, analysts traced radar gaps, signal trails, and flight logs late into the night. Words repeated like a new vocabulary of conflict. Low altitude, adaptive routing, distributed autonomy. Within 24 hours, movement followed. Washington fast-tracked $625 million in counter-EW and UAV support. Poland opened 2 forward refuel corridors, and Baltic defense ministries proposed a coalition standard for drone-era early warning doctrine. No victory parades in Kyiv, just screens showing voltage stability tests, satellite relay drills, and teams already designing the next evolution. Because the world had learned in a single morning what took empires decades to forget. Walls age, ideas don't. When the dust settled and the city lights flickered back to life. This was never a story about explosions. It was a story about imagination under pressure, about engineers who turned scarcity into strategy, and a nation that answered force not with louder fire, but with smarter silence. In those hours, the battlefield stretched beyond land and air. It moved into logic, signal, endurance. Power was not measured in steel, but in adaptation. Because in this new era, the defining weapon is not shape or size, it is thought sharpened into action. If you stood in that bunker, watching code become consequence, what would you have felt? Fear, awe, or inevitability? Tell me your thoughts below. Would you bet the future of warfare on missiles or mines?